Thank you, Your Honor. If I take a little break, I think I've shortened down what I might ask you. I don't know much more. Just a couple things. In Exhibit 403, there's an entry in your log. I'm sorry, I thought I had it. I apologize, Your Honor. I was doing real well to organize myself, and I've over-organized, and I can't find it. Here it is. Your entries start at page 15 of 26, where it has your name, and then they move on to page 16, and that's the one we were looking at that had the information that we discussed. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
And then they move on to page 17, and there's a statement here where it says, inmate Bruner received a tray at 12:02. What was that intended to convey?
When I put an inmate receives a tray, that means that I've given them to eat. So he's eating his tray.
So you are verifying in the log that he ate as you had reported in your subsequent report?
Yes, sir.
Then after page 17 in the exhibit, there is a new portion of the log that refers to a Daniel Safarik. He was your replacement then, is that right?
He was my relief, yes, sir.
And he would have been there through, we look at page 20, through when Lisa Williams assumed responsibility for the log, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then Lisa Williams would have, according to this exhibit, you read this right, she would have been there basically until the first shift was in her pod, a little bit after that, on March 10, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And that would be Mary Staton.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, I'm not going to ask you to do it because I think it would be a waste of the jury's time. But if one were to look back at the log, you might look back at the previous day's log, or you might look back at the previous shift's log, but to get to your log, Mary Staton had to go back 2 shifts, right?
Yes, sir.
You were asked whether or not inmate Bruner, I think you testified you were told by inmates that he had not been eating, but the only observation you had of inmate Bruner was when you were on shift that he did eat. Is that correct? In Exhibit 2, plaintiff, it's document number 59. I think it's been seen before by the jury, but this is a medical, an inmate medical screening report, and it shows a weight of Mr. Bruner of 162. Is that right? Is that what I'm referring to?
Yes, sir.
So if we wanted to see whether we had someone who had been refusing to eat for multiple dates, we could look at what his weight was after he was taken to the hospital, couldn't we?
Yes, sir, I believe you could.
And that way we'd maybe be able to bring some verification as to whether or not the reports that he had been eating, whether they were entirely accurate
Objection.
or...
What basis is this witness testifying that you could compare weights in a hospital?
Your Honor, I'll just go ahead and withdraw the question. Thanks. I don't have any other questions. Thank you, Deputy.
Just bear with me for 1 second here. No. I'm just looking for something. No further questions, Your Honor. Yes.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you, ma'am.
Sergeant Johnson Woodson.
Ma'am, would you please step into the witness box and raise your right hand so that you can be sworn? Yes. Go ahead. Would you please be seated and state your name and spell it for the court reporter?
Good afternoon. Sergeant Johnson Woodson. JOHNSON hyphen WOOT as in Tom SON.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Ms. Johnson Woodson.
Yes, sir.
Would you please state, good afternoon again, state your name to the court and jury, please.
Sergeant Johnson Woodson.
And are you, by your uniform, employed by Sedgwick County?
Yes, sir.
And what do you do?
Currently, I'm a first shift sergeant.
Where?
First shift sergeant with the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office at 141 West Elm Street.
Are you on the road or are you in the jail?
At the detention facility at the
Okay.
jail, sir.
How long have you been there?
Since September of 1996.
Okay. And were you there during the time that Terry Bruner was there?
Yes, sir.
Have you, and you and I have never had an opportunity to speak, have we?
No, sir.
And you and I, or have you had an opportunity to speak with the counsel for the defendants?
Are you speaking of?
Mr. Chalmers or anybody representing
Yes.
them?
Yes.
You've gone over your testimony with them?
Yes.
Okay. What have you gone over?
The only thing was I came in, they asked me what I knew about the case, which I really didn't have that much recollection of it, and they gave me a report that I had written during that time. and asked me a few questions about that.
Okay, and did you, and what were those questions? When was that, I should ask, a time frame?
When Mr. Charmer spoke with me,
Yes.
I don't recall the exact date. It's been several months.
Okay. You wrote a report. I have it. I think it's in evidence as Exhibit 2. Is it a 2-page report? Do you have it with you?
Yes, sir.
Is that the report that you went over?
Yes, sir. He asked me if I wrote the report, and I did write it.
Okay. Well, why don't we go over it?
Yes, sir. Excuse me. Can you tell me what your name is? I don't.
Jeffrey Feiger.
Fighter? Thank you.
Yes. On the above date, I was assigned as South Housing Sergeant and was briefed at the shift change that mental health was making rounds on the south side of the building. Why would you get briefed about that?
I was a second at this particular time. I was a second shift sergeant, and I either had all housing, but I was assigned as South housing, and so whoever was on that side on that particular day would have to brief me during shift change on, you have an interaction during shift change, and they bring things to your attention or tell you what went on first shift.
On the above date at approximately, or excuse me, go back up. I was contacted via telephone that I might have an inmate that was going on suicide watch, but that the mental health was in the pod, and that first shift had briefed after shift change, mental health would visit with an inmate as they would call me back. What does that mean?
Well, I was briefed on first by the supervisor leaving, and then it states that I was called on the telephone, so probably, and I don't say here who exactly called me, so most likely, or I can only speculate that maybe it was the pod deputy that called me that said that they had an individual that they contacted the clinic. After the clinic was contacted, I might have to put somebody on suicide watch. The reason why they would tell me something is like something of that nature is because if somebody goes on suicide watch, I have to change them out and make an IOF.
What's an IOL?
Inmate observation form.
And what does that mean?
Okay. If someone is placed on suicide watch, we generate an IOF, which is an inmate observation form, and the clinic will give us instructions, and we'll put it on there. It's basically a 15-minute suicide watch, and they're placed in a gown, and we take all of their items and stuff. And
So they were going to put Mr. Bruner on suicide watch?
it was my understanding that they had an individual that they might be placing on suicide watch.
Right.
At that time, I don't know if it was Mr. Bruner or not, but I was briefed that there was an inmate in pod 1.
Right. But the person they were talking about was Mr. Bruner?
I don't know which inmate at that particular time.
But I'm asking now. Now you know it was Mr. Bruner?
All I know is that at that particular time, there was an individual. I don't believe I had the name of the individual at that time.
I know you keep saying that time. Now I'm asking you, well, in the very next paragraph, it was obviously Mr. Bruner. Wasn't it? On the above date at approximately 15:45, is that 3:45?
Yes, at 3:45.
I was contacted by mental health staff as they exited pod 1.
Correct. They were coming out of the pod, and they said that inmate Bruner was in pod 1, and it was reported at by first shift that he had not been eating, nor was he coming out of his room, and so they went to see him to make sure he was not on a hunger strike or that he was suicidal.
Okay. And, okay. Clinic staff, did you know how they got notified?
No, probably by telephone. First shift would have. I was briefed that first shift had contacted them.
Who?
Who contacted them?
Yeah.
I don't know. Somebody on first shift obviously contacted them because that's what I was briefed by first shift, that mental health was making rounds and they were notified that they had an individual that needed to be looked at. And I was told that after shift change that they would look at this individual. At 3:45, when they were coming out of pod 1, the only way they could have contacted me probably was that I was in the hallway. And so I saw them coming out of pod 1. And that's when...
Well, let's just go through it. Clinic staff stated, do you know who this clinic staff is, what human being it is, their name?
No.
Clinic staff stated they told the pod deputy before they would treat him for mental health, he needed to be seen by medical. At that time, it was my understanding inmate Brewer was on his way to the clinic.
Yes, sir.
We heard today from Andrea Skelton, who said she walked in, she was the staff that you're referring to. She walked in and immediately thought...
I would prefer you just ask this witness questions about her knowledge and not try to state what her previous testimony would be. I don't think it's a proper form for the question like that.
Where are you going with this?
Well, does it refresh your recollection that there was no need to see him for mental because they had decided he needed medical?
He wasn't seen until second shift, I believe, or during the shift change.
So it was your understanding that he was going to be seen in the medical clinic and he was then going to be seen because he had mental problems?
Okay, I was briefed. They had an individual that needed to be seen and may be placed on suicide watch. It was my understanding that the clinic had been contacted. I don't know who contacted the clinic, who they spoke to, or who did the contacting, because that was on another shift. I was just briefed that there was a possibility that there was an individual that might be placed on suicide watch, that they were making their rounds and they had some concerns of someone not eating and needed to be seen. However, during that time, during them making their rounds and shift change, that's when they met up with me and stated that this individual, they just left the pod, and the individual, Mr. Bruner, needed to be seen by the medical clinic, and he, at that time, was being taken up to the clinic.
Did they tell you what was wrong with him or what they observed?
No.
I arrived in the clinic a short time later. On exiting the elevator, I could see an inmate in a wheelchair with their back to me, leaning slightly to the left. What do you mean by that?
Well, when you get off of the elevator, you kind of go into an open room. When I got off of the elevator, there's seating, and behind the seats there was someone sitting in a wheelchair. So as I exit the elevator into the room, their back would be to me, and they were leaning to the left a little bit, like maybe you have your arm on the left side of the chair and you're slightly slanted over.
As I exited the elevator, I asked, who is this female, viewed from back and long hair, and was told by Clinic 2 Deputy Janice Jones that was a male from Pod 1, and his name was inmate Terry Bruner, and he was brought up to the clinic for not eating to be seen by the doctors.
Yes.
So you were behind him while you were saying this?
Yes.
You didn't go up to the front and look at him?
No.
I walked to inmate Bruner to speak with him and see what the problem was. It appeared that inmate Bruner had some type of tie to his system. He's sitting in the chair, and then clinic staff, Tony and Tina, pushed his wheelchair with him into the exam room. What did he look like? Did he look sick?
Sick as in...
It's not. Did he look sick?
Actually, I don't really have a recollection of him. The only thing is that I remember, the reason why I remember someone sitting in a wheelchair is because females are usually on the first row and males on the back. And sometimes when inmates come to the clinic, they like to sit in the other chairs or the wheelchairs, and that's mainly why I made comment who is the female sitting in the chair. As I spoke with the clinic deputy, that's when I realized that it was a male and that he had something tied around him.
I continued to make my rounds and exited the clinic area to continue my duties. Later, I went back to the clinic area. When was that? When did you go back later?
I don't have a time on here.
And was told that inmate Bruner was being housed in the clinic. Possible alcohol-related issues?
Mm-hmm.
They told you, what was the alcohol?
Is that a question for
Yes,
me?
what was the alcohol?
I have.
What was the alcohol-related issue? I don't know. Was
I mean,
it that
I
he
don't.
was
I don't know
drunk?
either. No, I don't know either. Sometimes we have people that they house in the clinic because they might have a history of using alcohol, and so they monitor them to see if they're having withdrawals or
But he had been in
needs.
jail for 5 months, 4 months.
I don't know when he got there, honestly. So
He was already assigned and in bed sharing a room with another inmate the next time I saw him. So you saw him in bed.
yes,
What did he look like then? Did he look sick?
honestly, I don't recall. I just honestly, I don't recall.
At approximately 21:15 hours, I was contacted by Clinic 2 Deputy Jones that Dr. Fletcher. Mr. Fletcher isn't a doctor, is he?
I believe he's a PA.
Right, he's never gone to medical school. He doesn't have a doctorate, does he?
I don't know. It's sort of like when you're a cop in uniform, everybody thinks you do the same thing, you know, but
So you call him a doctor. You call him a doctor?
Dr. Fletcher,
Yeah, even though he's not a doctor.
I don't really know the difference. I'm not in the medical field. I just,
I was at 21:15. What time is that?
21:15 should be
what time is that?
approximately 9:15 hours.
9:15. You were contacted by Clinic 2 Deputy Fletcher that had run some lab tests and they had come back. Were you aware they had come back 3 hours before?
No, I have, due to HIPAA, and again, I don't work at the clinic. I have no idea. I don't know any of that aspect.
Did he present it to you as if they had just come back?
All I was told was they had some lab work came back, and this is the next step. I couldn't tell you what time. I couldn't tell you what came back, what test was ran.
But it was at 21:15, 9:15 that Fletcher called you and told you that he had lab results that indicated he needed to go right away to the hospital.
That he needed to be sent to St. Francis, yes.
Right, to the emergency room by EMS ambulance, right?
I don't know if he went to the emergency room. I do know that he went to the hospital.
By EMS?
Yes.
Well, you know, where else would EMS take you then, to the emergency room?
Okay, when it says Dr. Boutros had already, they had information that it was already set up with Dr. Boutros, and sometimes when we send people to the hospital, whether it be by road patrol or ambulance, they don't always go to EMS. Sometimes they go straight to admittance, or they have a room or something for them.
I see.
So I don't really know.
Okay. Now, there's a second page here. I contacted Dr. Fletcher and asked what to tell dispatch EMS. What did he and I was told and relayed inmate Bruner was being transported for elevated white count hepatitis C, cirrhosis of the liver, abdominal obstruction, warm firm abdomen, possible infection, and CAT scan of abdomen. Dispatch EMS were notified approximately 21:20. I then called for family visit Deputy Nathaniel Tate and prepared him for the hospital run. Is that what happened?
Yes, sir.
Now, all those things there, you said you're not a medical person, so how did you remember all those things?
No, it's not from memory. I don't know what half of that stuff is. Usually, when we call EMS, they always ask us. So I just asked real quick, kind of jotted it down on a napkin or a piece of paper, and just relayed to them, because we usually call and they're right there, and just tell them what the doctor says.
Say that again. What do you mean it's right there? I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Okay. When we contact dispatch to have the ambulance come, usually on the telephone they ask you, male, female. That's why it says there. I said, I relate to EMS. I have a inmate Bruner, 46, white non-Hispanic, Indian male, being transported for elevated white count, hepatitis C, cirrhosis of the liver, acute abdominal obstruction, warm firm abdomen, possible infection, and CAT scan of the abdomen. That's what I relate to dispatch.
Okay, and where did you get that information from?
From right there, from the doctors, because they're the ones that they give you the information to tell dispatch.
Okay, you say the doctors. You mean from Mr. Fletcher, the physician's assistant?
Yes, from the clinic.
Okay. Now, do you send patients to the emergency room often?
You mean the sheriff's office as a whole, or
No,
me
you personally, yeah.
No, we're not allowed to do that.
Well, I mean, you were involved here, so you provided information. Have you ever done that before on any other patient?
Yes,
Okay, is there a routine that you follow?
yes.
I'm wondering, when the hospital gets a patient like Mr. Bruner in the emergency room, who provides to them information about what his history is, how long he's been in this condition?
Once the response team arrives, like EMS, here I believe it was 24 and Squad 1. So once the fire rescue and the ambulance come, the actual medical records, due to HIPAA, because they don't give us any of that paperwork or anything, that goes directly, anything that has to go, if it's not faxed over, is given to them, and they transport it with the inmate.
You mean if Mr. Bruner had some medical records, they'd be transported with them, with the ambulance?
Okay, say it was a chest pain protocol. If they just did an EKG, they would send that sheet with them to
Okay.
the hospital.
Would they
Or
send
would
any,
fax them.
I understand, would they send any writing about how long a person been having chest pains, or how long a person has been unconscious, or when the
No.
symptoms start?
That, once EMS gets there,
Mm-hmm.
I don't really talk to them. I give them a face sheet, which is a booking sheet. It has all of the inmates' information on it, but they have a conversation directly with clinic staff about all that stuff. So I honestly don't know.
Who has a conversation with clinic staff?
Usually the EMS people.
I see. EMS came into the facility on the elevator 1 to the clinic area. Due to having gone into the clinic housing area, it was easier to exit through 206 being closest room and easier to exit. As they entered the awaiting elevator, while in the elevator, I placed my hand on the top of the blanket that was covering the inmate's chest and called out his name twice and told him he was being taken to the hospital. Inmate Bruner was moaning loudly. His breathing appeared to be labored. He appeared to be incoherent and lethargic and did not acknowledge me. Is that how he looked?
Yes, sir.
Did you attribute his moaning loudly to pain that he was undergoing?
No, my recollection of it was more like he was making sounds, but honestly, when you looked at him, I was afraid that he had took medication that belonged to somebody else.
So you were diagnosing him?
No, I don't have the authority to diagnose anybody. I'm just saying, and he wasn't responding. And so that's why I was letting him know who I was, where he was going, that he was been taken out. He did not speak, but he was moaning, and that's the way he looked to me.
Right, I know, and that's very kind of you, but you said inmate Bruner was moaning loudly. At the time you were writing this, nobody told you what to write, correct?
Correct.
You're now at the trial of 2 of the people accused in this case. Are you saying now you remember that he wasn't moaning loudly?
I never said he wasn't moaning loudly.
And my question to you was, did you attribute that to him undergoing pain?
Again, I'm not a medical doctor. I can only tell you what he did with me. He was
Okay.
moaning. I mean, I don't know why he was moaning. He
Okay.
never answered me.
How was he moaning? Can you tell us?
Honestly, I don't know. But at the time, when I wrote my report, these are the things that I remember that day that happened and what I did, sir.
A short time later, I was notified by the hospital deputy that inmate Bruner had spinal meningitis and all that were in contact, some ER personnel, road escort deputy, replacement road deputy, etc., were given medication as a precaution. Who told you that?
Who told me what?
That everybody who had contact with him were given medication as a precaution.
They gave us pills.
Who did?
The hospital ordered that we have pills, and everybody that came in contact with him that particular night, I know myself and Janice Jones were given pills at the facility. The other individuals were given pills at the hospital.
Okay, I see you didn't mention the the inmates like Mr. Navarrete and Mr. Obengai, who were in the cell cleaning up his vomit.
I don't know anything about that.
Okay.
I can only, okay, this is the thing. I have 1,700 inmates that we supervise, not personally, so I did not have any immediate contact with him other than what I stated in my report. I don't know who else was in the housing unit with him. You'd have to pull those records and stuff. I mean, I don't know who else was with him. I can only tell you who I spoke with that night and who was in the immediate area with me and what was done myself, sir.
Okay, so you don't know if anybody else who had contact with him
No,
was
sir.
given medication.
No, other than the people I listed. Other than the people that I've listed here in my report.
The next day, I was notified administration of the deputies concerned. The next day, I notified administration of the deputies' concerns. What are those?
Well, there had seemed to be some questions or rumors, and honestly, I don't remember what they were about, but it was in regards to things that had taken place the night before. Who all came in contact, this is like after the effect, who all had came in contact with who we later found out to be Mr. Bruner. And so I just brought that to administration's.
So the deputies were all concerned that he had contaminated them, and you brought that to those concerns to the captain?
Well, I don't know whether he was contaminated or not.
Excuse.
I know it's part of the report, but I don't know how it's relevant to this part of the case.
What would be the relevance?
It's part of the report.
But what's the relevance to the issues here?
I don't, other than it's part of the report, nobody's objected to any other part of these reports. I don't know.
Well, if you don't know why it's relevant, then let's move on.
And that's all I have to report at this time. Now, I guess I've just thought of something that would be relevant.
Yes, sir.
Apparently, they were so concerned that instead of him having some alcohol-related issues, that he had a serious contagious virus, or disease. The deputies were so concerned that a man had been among them who had such a serious disease, they were afraid they had gotten it. Right?
Is that a question or a statement? Are you asking me what somebody else thought? I don't.
Yeah, because that's what you wrote down. The next day I notified administrations of the deputies' concerns, and you said the concerns were that you found
I never
out...
said what the concerns were. What I said was they had concerns at this time, and I didn't put it in my report, so honestly, I don't remember. I just remember that there were people that had some questions, and it is my job to relay those questions to administration, which I did.
Okay, but you don't remember what those concerns were.
The exact concerns.
Okay, I got it. Well, let me see if I can prompt your memory. Were the concerns about the fact that he didn't receive any care while he was there?
Who didn't receive care?
Mr. Bruner. He was there for
Who
5 days.
did receive care?
In the 5 days he was down on the pod.
I don't know about that part. You'd have to ask. I don't know when he got into the facility.
Was that the concern, though?
I don't really know because I don't have access to, sir, honestly, I don't know when he got there, and unless I have the records to refresh my memory or to see, honestly, I don't know when he got there.
Well, doesn't the next sentence say that after the word concerns, you were told by Captain Maxwell that the test reported inmate Bruner was not contagious with spinal meningitis, but pneumococcus meningitis that's not as contagious as first thought?
Correct.
Isn't that what the concerns were about? That
Well, there was some about that, yes.
the deputies were in contact with a man who was so sick he might have a disease that they could catch.
No, I think it was more along the lines of other people that were in the area and had handled him and cleaned up the room and stuff, because we collect, anytime anybody goes to the hospital, we have to collect up, we send a deputy to go collect up the property, clean the rooms and stuff like that.
I have no further.
Thank you.
Mr. Chalmers?
Okay, working backwards. We're now March 10, 2008. You've had contact with an inmate, and someone said you have to take a pill because of concerns of that he has a disease that could be contagious. And that's part of the second report that counsel was visiting with you about. Is that correct? I mean, that's what we're talking about is.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So what you have is a situation where you and some others were asked to take pills because of concerns that the meningitis that Mr. Bruner was being diagnosed with might be communicable, right? You're shaking your head.
No. The clinic staff doesn't really give us any other information other than what I relate to EMS. However, we were told that anyone that came in contact had to take the pills. Honestly, I don't even know why they gave us the pills.
Okay.
It's sort of like when people come in there and they have TB and stuff. They check us and they...
So you and other deputies took these pills, right?
Yes, yes, sir.
Was it you and the other deputies that then had the concerns, what's going on? I mean, we've been told to take pills and we're not... Why is it that
Well, those,
that's an
yeah,
issue?
we did ask
Okay.
those questions.
And that prompted eventually a report, well, it's a different type of meningitis, right?
Yes.
Now, in your first report, and I'm going to ask you a series of questions that may not be fair, because did you tell me that you do not have really an independent recollection of this man or this evening?
Correct.
Well, I want to ask you to help interpret your report, and if you can't, that's fine. In the record 403, Exhibit 403, there's a daily activity log, and it shows, down where I'm trying to point here, that at 3:21, Deputy Hunt is in the pod for transport to the clinic of inmate Bruner, 24 down. You see that?
Yes.
And then it shows that Mr. Hunt, or Deputy Hunt, is out with inmate Bruner at 3:26.
Okay.
Now, you did, when you were talking with Mr. Feiger, you weren't aware of when it was that he was moved out of the clinic, but would this report show the time that he was moved out of the pod towards the clinic?
Correct.
And then there's another exhibit, 403, that's in evidence, and it shows, it's the inmate log, that Mr. Bruner is transported, or moved rather, from detention to the clinic at 15:27. And so that would be consistent with the other time that, well, it'd actually be a minute later, but that would suggest that someone entered that he's out of the pod and on his way to the clinic, right?
Correct.
And the trip to the clinic from pod 1, even with the wheelchair, takes a couple of minutes maybe.
Correct.
All right. So now we've got your report, and it says, on or about the date, or excuse me, on the above date at approximately 3:45 hours, and that's about 20 minutes later than when he left.
Mm-hmm.
I was contacted by mental health staff as they exited pod 1 that an inmate in pod 1 was reported by first shift not to have eaten and was not coming out of his room, so they went to visit him and make sure he was not on a hunger strike, suicidal. And it says the clinic staff stated that they told the pod deputy before they would treat him for mental health he needed to be seen by medical. At that time, it was my understanding that inmate Bruner was on his way to the clinic. So your understanding is this to be interpreted that your understanding is as of 3:45 that he's on the way to the clinic?
He was either on the way or was there. It was my understanding they.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at.
prepared him.
Your understanding may be when you reported that he was on the way, but in fact,
Because at the time, okay, he could have been, it showed that he was in the clinic at, what was it? 27 hours. They could have came in, saw him, and said he needs to go to the medical clinic. They could have taken him to the medical clinic, finished their rounds as they came out. Then that's when they.
okay. Well, I'm just trying to get a handle on what it is that you meant, and what I think, to be fair to you, what you're saying is that you don't really know and didn't know back when this report was prepared where he was. You're just simply trying to report at the time that you received it what you'd been told.
Right.
Now, there's next line, he was brought up to the clinic for not eating. No, let's down here. I want to talk to you shortly about this. Possible alcohol-related issues. Do you have an independent recollection as to what alcohol-related issues they're talking about back then?
No.
All right, you're shaking your head and saying no.
No, I'm sorry. No.
And looking at your other report that counsel referenced that's in Exhibit 2, they're talking about cirrhosis of the liver and hepatitis C, and there's been testimony those are alcohol-related issues. Do you have a memory one way or the other if that's what they were talking about?
Honestly, I don't.
In any event, your understanding as to why he was taken up to the clinic from what was communicated to you was that they had a concern, turned out not to be an accurate concern, but a concern of he might be on hunger strike or suicidal at the time that you authored this report.
Correct.
At that time in this report, because later you knew it was different, right?
Correct.
I don't have anything else, thanks.
Redirect.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
And this witness be excused then?
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. You are excused.
Thank you.
Next witness.
Can we approach the bench?